All right, last demo of the day. Got a little hectic in here. So we're doing the silk one on this. Things to know about silk is it has more angles because of the high reflective quality of it. If you're working from a research image, sometimes it's nice to actually trace out what some of those shapes are on your research image so that when you look over at them, it's easier to sort of identify them. I've gone ahead and toned the back page here so that we're more in that kind of peachy world. I'm using a lot of burnt sienna, a Mars orange on this, and we're gonna do it with sort of the thicker acrylic way of painting it first, and then we're going to do it over again with a more watercolor approach. Still using acrylics, but so in my like punchier, more opaque way, I'm gonna go ahead and add in some fairly dark shadows. I've got a bit of purple in this, some orange, and some sienna. I'm gonna work on making those little angular shadows. I also made it very tiny, which is on me. For the midtones, we're heading more into an orange apricot-y color. A little bit of gel medium in this, and a little bit of water to help us move and have less brush strokes. In the more opaque version, we can be a little bit more brave putting down brush strokes because we know that we're going to work with more opaque layers on top of it. In the watercolor version, we have to be a little bit more careful since it's going to show through a little more. Trying to find the perfect color of like just a little bit of green, a little bit of purple to mix in for the shadows. Pardon that pause. So this has gel medium in it, and I'm using more pure purple to kind of bloom out from those shadow areas and tone them cooler. They seem a little hot to me. So then I'm going to glaze sort of the whole area with a little bit of the yellow mixed with a little bit of the orange and some gel medium so it's transparent. I'm even glazing over some of the areas that will certainly be our highlights, but it helps bridge the gap from those shadows and midtones into that area. Then while that's still wet, I can work on some specifics of the deeper into the midtones and the more orange areas, kind of touching things in, but always keeping that sort of like angular quality to the shapes. Everything's still wet, but I'm going to try to start blocking in and adding some like of our highest midtones just under our highlights so that they're going to blend together. It's going to have a little bit of that yellowish quality, but I'm putting it in fairly translucency. I'm letting it blend together. There's quite a bit of gel medium in this white, so it's not going to be like punchy highlight. But I'm using it to tone and marry together all those layers, sort of mute them and turn the volume down a little bit. And once we get that done, we're going to have it entirely dry, and we will come back. Here it is. It is dry. So now we want those beautiful, bright, kind of angular highlights. You could do it a couple ways. One way, you could do it with a colored pencil so you feel very controlled. It's not going to be as bright of a white, and it's not going to feel as painterly, but it can feel very controlled or be a nice base coat, and then you can go over it or do it entirely with paint. Even your white isn't entirely opaque unless it's built up pretty well. So you might have to go a little thick with paint in this section to get the brighter lights and a little bit more of water or gel medium in areas that you want it to kind of feather out or blend in. The color qualities of this, I realized as I finished it, were like certainly more leaning towards the ochres than the oranges and peaches. But hey, it's the technique that matters. This was the 6th demo today. I use a little bit more orange over some of our shadow colors. I'm trying to tip it more towards that orangey world, and a little bit more purple as well, and then purple to add the shadow areas in on the feet, the grounding elements. Now, to me, this didn't quite capture the feeling of the original painting. I think if you spent a lot of time working on that gradient blend in the middle and spending a little bit more time with it, you could certainly achieve it. But as you can see here, it's a watercolor-based rendering that you're mimicking, so I'm practicing kind of using a water-based sketch there to start it. So this is, once again, identify those shapes. And we're going to do this the watercolor way. So I've toned the paper. It's already got that like slight ochre wash on it. And then I've got quite a bit of water and a nice orange, kind of just a little brighter than a burnt sienna. And I'm laying down translucent layers with it as if it were watercolor. I do realize that because I'm now working with watercolor technique, it's like too much line work. So be a little soft with your line work so it doesn't show through and look choppy. Rolling a kneaded eraser over it works really well to just lighten the lines without smudging them or disappearing them. Here you can always practice dipping if you're just picking up and you don't know what percentage of paint it is to water. You can either blot on the side like I do, or you can always just make sure you start at the darkest point and then it won't matter. So you can see that this is a pretty like similar watercolor technique. We're dropping in and increasing saturation, and anywhere that has a shadow, it's still wet, but it's going to be drying pretty fast because it's absorbing into, I'm working on top of Bristol for this. If you're working on top of watercolor painting paper, it would work even better. Dry a little quicker on you. Still working with some purple for our shadow colors, but not adding in any browns this time. So because there's yellow in the orange, it's going to muddy out on its own. They're going to automatically mix because we're working wet into wet. I'm just sort of touching my brush that's loaded with pigment into that area, and it's like automatically applying it and diffusing. I like a little bit of a thin yellow wash to bridge and brighten some of our gaps, add to our midtones. Just quickly in that shadow for contrast's sake, and then we're going to let this all dry and come back and do our highlights. So once again, you could use colored pencil if you wanted. I like white paint for this one. This is the benefit of using acrylics and doing a watercolor technique, but then not having to treat them just like watercolor, because now we can use this to kind of carve out and add some painterly quality to the shapes. Mixing kind of a purpley reddish tone to darken just a few choice shadows. It's always that game of finding like, well, if I bump the highlights up, then maybe the shadows need to get darker. Working on balance. The background wash of this one could be a little punchier also, which would help the highlights come forward. It's pretty faint, especially on camera. When we're working with wanting them to be very opaque, it means you have to put a lot of, especially with white, a lot of paint on your brush. almost no gel medium. Just a small, slightly damp brush will help you get that done. And I hope that helps. Good luck.